This is the new 2025 Toyota 4Runner, and I love it. I really do. To be clear, I love the old one also, but this is a master class in how to redesign a vehicle, modernize it in all of the ways that need improvement, but still keep everything people loved about the old one. Today, I'm going to review the new 4Runner and show you what I mean, and I'll also show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. So far, Cars and Bids has sold almost $500 million worth of cars, all sorts of special, interesting stuff like this, and this, and this, and this. So, if you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car, do it at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new 6th generation 4Runner, which has some rather interesting tricks up its sleeve. Like, for example, you open up the driver's door and you can see on the side of the dashboard there's a little circular panel there. It says Toyota. You look closer and it says removed with an arrow. Twisted in that direction, you can remove this and discover that it's actually a light, a circular LED light with various brightness settings, and you can even turn it red if you want to, so it could be a flashlight and light your way. And there's even a hook that can come out from the top of it, so you're at a campsite, you can hook it to a tree branch or to a tent and light up your general area to make it easier to clean up or just hang out. This is built into the new 4Runner, a very cool and interesting quirk. More in a second, but first, let's talk basics. We'll start with one of the most notable changes to the new 4Runner, which is under the hood. For years, Toyota 4Runners have had 6-cylinder engines, V6 power for years, decades in fact, but no longer. The new 4Runner offers a choice between 2 turbocharged 4-cylinder engines. There's the base engine, which has about 285 horsepower, or you can upgrade to this, a turbo hybrid 4-cylinder with about 325 horsepower. Now, that's only a 40 horsepower difference between the two engines, but the real gain comes in torque. The base powertrain only has about 315 pound-feet of torque, but the hybrid has almost 460 pound-feet, which is a huge boost over what you get from the standard engine. Although, when it comes to the new 4Runner, the real gain is in pricing. The base model entry-level version of the new 4Runner starts around $42,000. It's only about $600 more expensive than the outgoing model, which isn't much. But all the other versions are vastly more expensive than the ones they replace. In fact, the top off-road trim level, the TRD Pro, now starts around $68,000, which is a $12,000 price increase over the $56,000-ish base price of the outgoing TRD Pro. Now, that's an extreme example, but even most of the mid-range new 4Runner models are around $4,000 to $6,000 more expensive than the 4Runners they're replacing. Now, in Toyota's slight defense, 2 things. Number one, the new 4Runner is vastly improved compared to the outgoing model, which had been on sale since 2010. It was one of the oldest vehicles on the market, and it was really starting to get old and feel old in basically every way. This is a huge change, and so one could justify the price increase in that way. More importantly, the outgoing 4Runner had significant demand right up until the last year or so, when sales have finally started to tail off. And that was particularly true of the off-road models like the TRD Pro. Dealerships were marking them up to prices that are basically on par with where the sticker price is now. And I think Toyota saw that and said, hey, if people are willing to pay that money for a 4Runner, we would rather take the profits than the dealerships. And so I think pricing is a little bit more in line with where the market actually is on these cars. But regardless of all that, it is still a lot of money for a 4Runner and a big jump over the outgoing model. Another big new change for the 6th Gen 4Runner compared to the old model is the addition of a new top-level off-road trim. On the previous 4Runner, the best pinnacle off-road model was the TRD Pro, but now the TRD Pro is joined by this, a new model called the Trailhunter, which is priced the same but positioned for a different kind of off-roader. Toyota says the TRD Pro buyer is more of the high-speed desert runner, whereas the Trailhunter is more of the long trip overlanding buyer, and the two trims have different equipment depending on which one you'd prefer. As an example, the suspension system in the TRD Pro is geared more towards that off-road high-speed desert running, whereas the Old Man Emu suspension in the Trailhunter in this one is intended more for sort of slower speed rock crawling and various different terrains. The Trailhunter also includes a few other distinctive features to separate it from the Pro. One is this snorkel, as you can see right here going up the A-pillar, which will help the water fording depth of this 4Runner. Obviously the Pro, if you're out in the desert, you're not going to be fording water, but in the Trailhunter, that might be a reality. The Trailhunter also comes with this roof rack, as you can see, which again makes more sense for the long-haul overlanding trip people who want to keep a lot of stuff with their vehicle because they're going to be off the grid for a long time. And beyond stuff like that, there's also some pretty significant cosmetic changes that distinguish the two trims. One on the outside is the wheels. The Trailhunter gets gold wheels, which I guess Toyota feels more suits the overlanding community. Perhaps they're a bit more genteel than the high-speed desert runner community in the Pro, which gets these black wheels. It looks a little bit more sporty and aggressive compared to this. Now, with all of that said, both the Trailhunter and the TRD Pro do share the most important aspects, which are standard four-wheel drive on both of these off-roady models. They also both get the turbo hybrid 4-cylinder, the upgraded powertrain compared to the base turbo 4, and they both come with all of Toyota's useful off-roading hardware, which means they both come with low range for especially tricky situations and locking differentials, which is nice, and they both include Toyota's multi-terrain select system, which allows you to choose what terrain you're on, and the vehicle will adapt automatically, and they both include crawl control, which is also a very useful off-road feature that can help you get unstuck from some rather difficult situations. Then next up we move inside, where we discover another big change for the Trailhunter compared to the TRD Pro is their featured accent color. The TRD Pro has always used red as sort of its signature feature color, but the Trailhunter uses yellow, which is emphasized all throughout this interior. You can see yellow stitching on the seats along with yellow trim on both the backrest and the seat bottom, noting that this is a Trailhunter model. Same deal on the center console, yellow stitching going down the side, and on the glove box, you can see yellow stitching there as well for the Trailhunter, and above the glove box, the giant Toyota lettering on the passenger side of the dashboard, you can see has yellow trim underneath. That's all distinctive to the Trailhunter, again, to try to differentiate it from the Pro. But since we're inside, probably the most important thing we got to talk about in here is the vast difference in this interior compared to the outgoing 4Runner model. This vehicle has been totally redesigned, like I mentioned, and nowhere is that clearer than the interior, which is completely different and vastly higher tech than the rather old interior in the outgoing 4Runner model. And we got to start with the most obvious change, which is the giant screen in the center. Replacing the previous 4Runner's rather small and outdated screen, this one is huge and it's excellent. I have this very same infotainment system in my personal new Toyota Sequoia and it works great. Big screen with big lettering, you can always see it, always read and understand it, very responsive to your touch, very intuitive and easy to use. It also comes standard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's wireless in this car and it all just works great. And on the subject of this screen, I especially love the camera system. For one thing, how easy it is to pull it up. You press this button here in the center marked View with a little camera on it, and boom, the cameras appear instantly on the center screen, which is really useful if you're trying to park this in a tight spot, you want to see exactly where you are, or if you're off-roading, rock crawling, you want to make sure you clear an obstacle. It's nice to have the camera so easily accessible. So many cars bury camera access deep in some menu, and it's hard to figure out, but here, one button and they're up. And they're excellent. The camera system in this car is fantastic, as you can see. Front, sides, rear, all sorts of different camera views, basically any angle you could possibly want, including a 3D surround system, so you can see basically everywhere on the car in real time. It is a massive improvement compared to the outgoing 4Runner's old school camera system that just wasn't cutting it in the off-road world. This is a huge, much better system in a better infotainment system overall. Now, beyond that center screen, you also have a new gauge cluster screen here, now completely digital gauge cluster, and there are some pros and cons. The benefit is it's high resolution, very easy to see and figure out, pretty intuitive, and it lets you select from various different styles of gauge cluster. And they're kind of funny names. You could choose tough, for example, or casual, sporty. These are your different choices, and they all actually pretty well correspond to the word they've selected for each one, which is kind of cool to see. But one thing I don't love about this gauge cluster system is you still can't really configure it exactly like you'd want. I can't get a full screen map in here. I can't have the map displayed next to the music. Most of the gauge cluster displays give me vehicle information like trip odometer, tire pressures, elevation, that sort of thing, but they don't really give me some of the main things I'd love to see there, like the map, the music, the phone, and frankly, even adjusting and configuring this display is rather clunky to do. It requires a lot of different menus and going pretty deep in to make changes to it. So the gauge cluster screen is fine, but it could be better. Now, also in this vicinity, talking about improved technology, the adaptive cruise control is radically better than what you got in the old 4Runner. It now goes full speed, so you can go all the way down to 0 if the car in front of you stops. This will come to a stop too, and then it can restart for you as well. It also comes with a steering assist feature that is really excellent and does a great job of steering, obviously more on highway sweeper curves, staying in your lane instead of like tight neighborhood turns, but a really good overall system, and again, a massive improvement compared to the old 4Runner. Some of the stuff I'm talking about here has been in other cars for more than a decade, not even really high-end luxury cars. It's about time the 4Runner finally got on board with some of this technology. And there's also the last interesting screen in this interior, which is the rear view mirror. You can see right now it's just a rear view mirror, but if you flip this switch, it becomes a screen with a camera system showing you what's going on behind you. This is a big deal because with a rear view mirror, you gotta look through your rear passengers or your cargo area, which might be full, and that renders it unusable. But when it's a camera, it's behind the car and it's always showing you what's back there, even if your interior is full. I love that feature. I wish more cars had it, and I'm glad that Toyota has adopted it in so many vehicles. But before you go thinking that with all these screens and all this tech, the new 4Runner has gone soft, well, think again. There's still a lot of 4Runner in this interior, starting with the general design in here. You can see very few curves at all, mostly right angles, blocky design, materials you'd expect to be in here. Tough, durable stuff. No wood or aluminum trim, no high quality leather stitching everywhere. It's all tough truck stuff in the 4Runner, which is what 4Runner people expect. And there's more tough truck stuff as you look around, like this grab handle here in the center console. You can see it's rubber finished and it really sticks in place so you can grab onto it when you're off-roading in case you're afraid something bad is going to happen. Same deal on the door panel, by the way, where the regular door handle doubles as a second grab handle so you can grab on with both hands if you're the passenger. In fact, the door panel, even the storage compartments look tough and muscular with their like holes and squared off designs. It's all intended to give you sort of that 4Runner feel. Come back into the center and you'll see even the cup holders are square. Despite the fact that most cups are round, the cup holders are squared off here because that fits with the blocky, burly, muscular 4Runner. And to further mark that, you still have an old school gear selector in here. Push the button in and then pull it down into gear and push it up into park. Old school. They haven't gone to an electronic gear selector in the 4Runner with little dainty push buttons. Even though so many other cars have, it's not here. And then you have the climate controls. You have to have circles here for the dials to change temperature, but even those dials look tough with these sort of fake screws put into them, and they're big, and the switches you use to change change the rest of the climate control settings, they're also big and textured, and they just look and feel cool, like you're doing something important when you're pressing them. It's all 4Runner when it comes to the style and the look and the feel of this interior. By the way, worth pointing out, with those climate controls, they are separated from the infotainment screen. You don't have any climate in the screen. You still have physical, tough-looking buttons. And the look isn't the only tough thing in here. You still have all the cool off-roading equipment like I mentioned before. This button disconnects the stabilizer bar, which is nice to be able to do from in here, improves your suspension and wheel travel, much better for off-roading. The button right next to that, that's your locking differential, which again, standard on the Trailhunter model, and again gives you more capabilities off the pavement. And this giant dial in the center, this does basically everything else. You can see there's a switch on top of the dial that lets you change between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, high and low. Operating this switch is unusual. There's a button on the side you push in, and then you move the switch corresponding to what it is that you want. Now, the dial sitting on top of that, the dial itself lets you turn on crawl control, which is Toyota's excellent system that can basically get you unstuck from a lot of sticky situations. You also have downhill adaptive cruise control here, and MTS, which is the multi-terrain select system. You tell the car what terrain you're on, and it adapts wonderfully. Amazing to have all of these features in here, again, proving that this 4Runner still has the chops. And beyond all that, there are some especially interesting quirks and features worth discussing in here that are clever new tricks of the new 4Runner. For instance, right above the glove box, you can see this little compartment is for storage. Obviously, it doesn't close, but if there's something you might need easy access to, you can leave it there, and it's just sitting right there over on the passenger side, a nice, thoughtful storage compartment. And right next to that compartment, you can see on the side of the infotainment screen, a power port. That's intended for you to be able to plug in a device that you might be mounting to the windshield. So if you have a windshield GoPro, for example, or a windshield mount for a phone for off-roading navigation, you can plug it in there. It's much more convenient than trying to run the cord down to the center console. That's pretty nice. Now, also on the dashboard here, you have a speaker in the center. Pretty standard location for a speaker, but you'll notice this one has a little button in front with an arrow. You push that and it ejects the speaker, which can then come out of the car and be used as a standalone Bluetooth speaker. You can tether your phone to this and then play your tunes at the campsite or on tailgating, whatever you're doing, with a built-in speaker. When you're done, you just put it right back in. It goes back into the dashboard and acts as another speaker in this car's sound system, but it can also come out and be a portable Bluetooth. That is a really cool idea. And another important 4Runner quirk is on the ceiling, where you see this switch, which seems like a very small thing, just a little ceiling switch, but it gives you access to one of the 4Runner's best known party tricks, the rear window that can roll down. You push that switch and the rear window in the tailgate automatically rolls down, which is a very cool feature to have. For one, if there's like dogs back there or surfboard stuff you want to air out, you can have that window down while you're driving, which is nice. But you can also put down the side windows in the car, and with the rear window down, you get a great breeze blowing entirely through the 4Runner. They've had this feature for years, and I, and everybody else, am thrilled that they kept it for the new 6th gen model. At this point, it would be hard to give up the 4Runner's roll down back window. And here's another cool quirk of the new 4Runner. To the left of the steering wheel, you have all your typical buttons over there, your interior dimmer, open the fuel door, that kind of stuff. But there's also a fog light button there, and you can see it's lit up in white, or press it and yellow. You can light it up in white or yellow. You push and it changes color. Why does it do that? Well, that's because the fog lights themselves can light up in white or yellow depending on how you have that button pushed. If you want your fog lights to be white, you just select white and they are. You want them yellow, you select yellow. It is very cool to have that option. There are a lot of aftermarket fog light solutions that do give you that choice between yellow, white, or various other colors, but I've never seen it from the factory. You can select white, or you can be one of those yellow fog light off-roader people. Now, next to that fog light switch, you have another switch there for the light bar, and that activates your TRD light bar, which is built into the grille, this big horizontal light bar that really lights stuff up when you have your high beams on. I can attest to this. I have this light bar in my Sequoia, and it is fantastic. If you're off-roading at night, things are starting to get dark, you can't really see, you can turn on that light bar and it lights up the world, way more than just regular high beams. It's a great feature to have built in, as opposed to buying one aftermarket and trying to wire it yourself like so many off-roaders have done in previous off-road vehicles. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the new 4Runner, which is actually pretty roomy. I have the front seat position where I would sit as a taller driver, 6'4", and sitting behind it, it's okay. Knee room is compromised a little, but I got good headspace, hip room, leg room. It's pretty decent roominess back here. And for the center passenger sitting back here, you can see the hump in the floor in the back doesn't come up that far and compromise foot room too much for a rear passenger in this center seat. It comes up a little bit, but not as much as I would expect in a vehicle that's sending power to its rear wheels. So this center seat is still relatively usable. Plus, there are some nice amenities for rear seat passengers in the new 4Runner. You can see 2 USB-C ports back here for charging devices, which is obviously nice to have, but more importantly, next to that, lift up this panel and you have a household power plug back here, which is especially useful for charging devices. That is a great feature to have in the back seat. We're seeing more car companies integrate those into tailgate areas, but in the back seat it can be particularly useful for charging cameras or gear when you're just driving to the next off-road adventure. It's nice to see. And another great feature in the new 4Runner is they've integrated cup holders into the door panels. You can see on both sides, driver and passenger, individual distinctive cup holders, which is great because most cars confine rear cup holders to the center armrest, which means you don't have any cup holders if someone is sitting in the middle seat back here. But in this case, if someone's sitting in the center, you still have these cup holders on the doors. Now, with that said, if there's no one sitting in the center, you put down this armrest and you do have some extra cup holders here, but it's nice to still have them on the doors in addition. Now, with all of that said, and a lot of great stuff back here, there is one drawback that I think is missing, and that would be heated rear seats. This is intended to be an off-road, go-anywhere adventure vehicle, taking it through all climates, and for almost $70,000, you don't get heated rear seats. Hyundai gives it to you in cars for half that money, and it's disappointing to see that feature didn't make the cut when it should have, especially on this trim level. And next up, we move on to the cargo area, but we'll start with the tailgate, which has 2 arrow buttons on it, as you can see. One arrow pointing up, sort of an up triangle, and another one pointing down. They have an interesting and rather useful function. If you're walking away from the car and you just want to lock it, you tap the upper button and the doors lock and you can walk away, which is nice. And same deal the opposite way. You're walking up to the car to unlock it, you tap the lower button and that unlocks the doors, which again is a nice feature to have. But the coolest part of these buttons is they also operate the window in the tailgate. You walk up to the car and you hold down the lower button and you can see the window automatically rolls down, which is really cool. Of course, it also works the other way. Hold down the upper button and the window automatically rolls back up. Now, this is more than just a cool party trick to show your friends. It's also surprisingly useful. You're carrying some smaller item, walking up to the car, the cargo area is full, you don't want to open the tailgate, you just lower the window and you can toss it in and then close the window right back up again. Again, a great feature to have and nice to see that it can still be controlled from the outside. But next up, we get into the cargo area, open up the power tailgate, and you'll see, well, this is the cargo area. There are some great pros, benefits in this cargo area, but also some drawbacks back here, and I'll start with the benefits. For one, it is big. You can see a big, wide, flat space, and because the 4Runner has kind of a boxy exterior design, the cargo area isn't impeded by like a teardrop shape that steals vertical space back here. You have a lot of space up, down, side to side. It's a good, big, practical cargo cargo area. And there's some other nice benefits. For one, there's additional storage on the side. You can see this little side compartment has a bunch of little pockets where you can store extra stuff, and you have one of those on both sides. You also have a built-in air compressor back here, which is tremendously useful. You can use this to inflate or deflate your tires when you're about to go off-roading or coming home. I can tell you, this is really nice to have built into the vehicle. I had a car with a built-in compressor once, and it was wonderful, and most of us off-roaders run an auxiliary unit, which you gotta remember to carry around. It's clunky, you gotta plug it in somewhere. It's much nicer to have it built in, and it's cool to have it back there. Really adds to the off-roading capability of this car. And one more nice benefit in the cargo area is you get a power port, and not just any, but another household port back here where you can plug in bigger stuff and charge, your gear or your devices, stuff that might be important when you're going on a serious off-road expedition. Obviously, like I said, this is designed more for overlanders, and that's the kind of thing they would want. Nice to see 2 household power ports in here. But there are also drawbacks in the cargo area, starting with the most obvious, the height of the load floor. You can see if you're lifting in some heavy item, you don't just have to lift it over the bumper like in most cars, but also you have to cover this rather large additional space to get it onto the floor of the cargo area. Apparently this is here because the battery system, the hybrid batteries, take up this space in the cargo area and they lift up the load floor. It certainly compromises the ease of getting heavier or bulky items into the cargo area with this tall load floor. Now, it's worth pointing out you can remove some of this stuff. You can take off this front trim piece, for example, and remove this rubber cargo floor. That lowers the floor height a little bit, but not dramatically. You're still stuck with a pretty tall spot back here. Makes it a little bit harder to load and unload cargo. The other drawback of the cargo area is, in this model, the lack of third row seating. The new 4Runner is offered with a third row, which is excellent. The new Land Cruiser is not, but Toyota restricts the third row to only certain models, and they don't offer it on the off-road versions, the Pro and the Trailhunter, which I think is such a disappointment. There may not be a lot of us out there who off-road with big groups of people, but we do exist, and it would be nice to have the option to get all of the off-road equipment and third row seating. Toyota is surprisingly restrictive with their third row availability in their larger off-roady models. The Sequoia, of course, has it. That's the biggest one, but the Land Cruiser doesn't have it at all. And although the 4Runner offers a third row, it's limited to a relatively small number of trims, which really is a bit of a disappointment. I just wish it was more available. But anyway, next up, let's talk exterior of the new 4Runner, starting with a couple of interesting quirks. For one, the taillight design, which you can see here, very distinctive and unusual with all these sort of lines that light up with the taillights. Certainly a unique look for the 4Runner, and the turn signal is rather small. You can see it's just this one horizontal line of LEDs. It's small, but I guess it gets the job done. Now up front, the headlights have an aggressive, brawny look, which keeps with the design ethos of the 4Runner. And if you look closely at these headlights, you can see on the driver's side, you have a little Trailhunter logo integrated into the headlight housing. And if you go over to the passenger side, the word Trailhunter is actually spelled out over there, which gives you kind of a neat Easter egg on the outside of the 4Runner. And since we're talking about the outside of the 4Runner, let's just discuss the overall design and look of this vehicle. I think it's fantastic. I think Toyota absolutely nailed the redesign of this 4Runner, taking a beloved, iconic model, the 5th gen 4Runner, which I think will go on as one of the great Toyota trucks, and modernizing it. It's difficult, it's hard to do, and they did a great job. It looks great, it looks 4Runner, it still has a lot of the characteristic 4Runner elements, just brought to a newer, more modern, more up-to-date level. It's a really excellent redesign. Now, with that said, I have seen some complaints on the internet about the look of the new 4Runner. And I'll tell you, honestly, it's just because this design is new. Every time a new model is released, you see people criticizing. It's a shock to their system, a new model. Oh, but we loved the old one. I am old enough to remember when the 4th gen 4Runner came out in 2003 and the 5th gen came out in 2010, and the harsh criticism of those vehicles on the online forums systems at that time. Now, 20 years later, those are the only real 4Runners, and with this one, they've ruined it. That's just what happens in this world. The enthusiast community gets really entrenched in the models and designs that they love, and seeing a brand new one is just too shocking for them to process. But I promise you that over the years, this design will become beloved in the 4Runner community as well. And to the point where the 7th generation model comes out in 10 years, people are going to talk about how much better this one is and how they've ruined the new one. It is the circle of life in redesigning vehicles, and particularly off-road vehicles. That community really likes what they like, and they don't like change, but they will adapt, and this is a great redesign. Now, with all of that said, I do have to admit that the Trailhunter, this one, and the TRD Pro models are a little cartoonish in their look, with the giant oversized fender flares, the big tires. They may be a bit too overstyled, a bit too aggressive, a bit trying too hard, but at least they don't have camo fenders. Okay, with all of that said, now it's time to do something I've wanted to for the last year since they first showed off the new 4Runner. Get behind the wheel and see how it drives. Let's do it. All right, driving the new 4Runner. Now, I've been driving this 4Runner around for quite a while in fact, because for the first time in 12 years of filming, all of my shots got messed up and I've had to reshoot this entire video, so I've done it twice. And there's a lot to say about the driving experience. I already did like a little tour of the 4Runner about a year ago when they first revealed it, but the drive is the big part. It's the first time I've really gotten behind the wheel. And there's a few really important things to note about this car. The most important and the biggest surprise for me is the steering and handling, which isn't something that usually you talk about with a midsize SUV. But in the case of the 4Runner, it's always been kind of a drawback of this car. It's always been like a trucky, off-roady type SUV, and so the steering and handling was always subpar. In this case, on this new 4Runner, I am shocked to report the steering and handling is actually quite impressive. When you drive this around, it feels surprisingly tight, surprisingly composed. You know, my Sequoia, which is like the next size class up from this, feels like a big, lumbering, floaty SUV. And I've just taken that as a trade-off of a body-on-frame vehicle. It's just the way it's got to be. But here, this 4Runner is proof that that isn't necessarily how it has to be. The steering is way more predictable, way tighter. It doesn't feel as floaty. You don't feel a lot of body roll. It doesn't feel sporty or like quick like a sports car, but it is designed. It drives well. In fact, I would say truthfully that this drives a lot like basically every other midsize SUV, even the crossovers like the Kia Tellurides and the Hyundai Palisades, which is absolutely shocking to me. And that has always been one of the drawbacks of this vehicle, that it drove truckier, that the steering was disconnected. Well, actually it drives surprisingly well, really up there with other midsize SUVs. Okay, so that's one big thing. Number two, the next big thing worth discussing is the powertrain. Obviously going away from a V6 and onto this hybrid 4-cylinder, and there's been a lot of groaning and complaining about that from the usual suspects, the forum users who are obsessed with, a 20-year-old version of this car. I gotta tell you, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good powertrain. To me, the biggest benefit, the biggest positive here is the power and the feel of the engine power of this car. It drives well. It has good power, both for low speed acceleration and for like mid-range passing power. It actually delivers good power in basically every situation where you need. And frankly, that's most of what you're looking for from an engine like this, in addition to the obvious benefit that it has more power, more torque, and better fuel economy than the outgoing motor. The drawback about this engine is that it sounds strained. When you're accelerating, even at like 3,000 RPM, it sounds like the engine is working pretty hard. It sounds like it's like really going at it in order to get you that level of power. Now, when I step on the accelerator at 3,000 to go to 5,000, it delivers even more power. So it seems like it actually is, there's something left there, even though it sounds pretty strained, but it does sound pretty strained. And so they've made this vast improvement in terms of handling and steering to like sort of make it more like city friendly, consumer friendly, and yet at the same time, we hear the engine more now. I think that 4Runner customers are not really going to be surprised by this or disappointed by this. They're generally used to kind of a little bit less refinement, but people who are cross-shopping this with a midsize SUV may be surprised by just how much engine noise they hear, even driving like around town in sort of regular circumstances. Now, the other important thing to discuss with this vehicle, they've improved the steering and handling so much, you might be wondering about ride quality. That has always been another drawback of the 4Runner. It is a truck-based, body-on-frame SUV. Isn't the ride quality bad? And the answer is, this time, the ride quality is significantly better than before, but it is still rougher than a regular crossover. Your Kia Telluride, your Toyota Highlander, your Honda Pilot. And I think that that is ultimately just one of the drawbacks of a body-on-frame SUV that it's difficult to come back from. You just are never going to really make it ride that car-like when you're dealing with, a frame and putting a body on top of it. It is better than before. The ride quality is good for a 4Runner. Like, it's still, you will still feel a smoother vehicle if you drive most other, mid-size SUV contenders in the segment. It's just hard to turn a vehicle based on a pickup truck into a Honda Pilot or something. Now, beyond those things, this is otherwise a well-executed vehicle that, again, really makes it feel like a 4Runner, like you'd expect a 4Runner. And even though it's been improved and upgraded and there's new materials and there's new technology in here, you don't really feel like you're losing out on anything that you liked about the old 4Runner. If what you liked was sort of its brawn and muscle, this still has it. And so from a driving perspective, this is a masterful improvement on the old model. The only drawbacks are the ride still isn't incredibly luxury car smooth, which is, at this price point a little disappointing, and the powertrain does sound louder than you might want. But those are minor drawbacks considering all the other improvements that have been made for the new 4Runner. And so that's the new 2025 Toyota 4Runner. There's a lot to like here, with good new styling, a vastly improved interior with great new technology, impressive powertrains, awesome practicality, and, as always, excellent off-road capability. It's everything you loved about the old 4Runner, just improved. And now it's time to give the new 4Runner a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 58 out of 100, which puts the new 4Runner Trailhunter here in this hotly contested world of off-roader SUVs. This score is impressive, beating out the Jeep Wrangler and the Ford Bronco, and tying the new Toyota Land Cruiser, which costs a lot more. Overall, the 4Runner is the best Toyota off-road SUV compromise in terms of capability, pricing, sizing, performance, and technology. I'd probably buy a 4Runner over a Sequoia unless I really needed the seats, over a Lexus GX unless I really wanted the luxury, or at least the perception of luxury, and over a Land Cruiser unless I really wanted that brand name.